action potential. Okay, so otherwise we call it as membrane potential. So let's see about the action potential. Okay, this is the definition of action potential generation. Okay, that is nothing but the process by which neuron rapidly depolarize from negative resting potential, that is called depolarization, to the more positive potential, that is called repolarization. Okay, so that is achieved by influx of Gaussian sodium ions or the calcium ions. Calcium ions in the process using for the depolarization, and the sodium ions, that is K plus ions, is for repolarization through the ion channels. After reaches the more positive potential to after reaches the threshold value, they travel along to the resting potential, that is minus 77 volt, that is otherwise called as hyperpolarization. Okay, the next one is the resting state, that is the minus 70 millivolt, that is the stimulus starts from the minus 70 millivolt, that is the resting potential, that is the membrane of excitable cells permit entry of the K plus and Cl minus ions, but the blocks Na plus ions, that is sodium. They have 50 to 100 times that for Na plus ions. Okay, after reaches the threshold voltage, the signal will travel. Okay, the Na plus ions are pulled out, the K plus ions are pulled in, the sodium gets open after reaches the 0 volt. That process is called depolarization. Na plus ions are pulled out, K plus ions are pulled in. Okay, the sodium gates are closed after reaches the 0 volt, and then peak overshoot, then repolarization process starts, that is falling ratios. The potassium gates are open, that is the active sodium and potassium pumps. Na plus ions are pulled in, K plus ions are pulled out. The process is called the repolarization. After reaching the resting potential, the signal travel along through some volt, that is minus 90, that is minus 90 millivolt. Okay, so the Na plus ions are automatically opens up and then no penetrate through the ions, so they will automatically close it, the same as K plus ions too. Okay, this is the approximate plot of the typical action potential. Okay, this shows the various ways as action potential passes a point on the cell membrane. They show clearly the resting potential and then the threshold level, depolarization process, repolarization process, and also the hyperpolarization process. Okay, let's see. The membrane potential starts at approximately minus 90 millivolt at the time of 0. The stimulus is applied at the time equal to 1 ms, which raises the membrane potential above minus 65. So the rises the potential rapidly rises to peak potential, that is the plus 35 millivolt at the time of 2 millisecond. Just as quickly reaches the peak overshoot, the potential then drops and overshoot to minus 90 volt at the time of 3 milliseconds. And finally, the resting potential minus 70 millivolt is re-established at the time of 5 millisecond, that is the hyperpolarization. The depolarization process, the opening up of voltage gated Na plus channel sodium ions, they typically raises the stimulus to the peak potential plus 35 voltage. Up to this level, this is called as depolarization. Then quickly the potential will drops and overshoot to minus 90 volt. That process is called the repolarization, the closure of sodium ions and opening of potassium ions, the voltage gated channels. Okay, after reaches the threshold voltage, then travel along the resting potential to minus 90, below 90 voltage, that is called the hyperpolarization. The voltage gated K plus channels remains open after the potential reaches the resting level. They themselves re-established at the time 5 milliseconds up to. Okay, that process is called hyperpolarization. Okay, this is the approximate plot of the action potential. They show clearly what is depolarization, then what is repolarization, then what is hyperpolarization. The threshold level வந்து -90 வோல்ட்லேருந்து உனக்கு பீக் ஓவர் ஷூட் வரைக்கும் போகிற பேர் என்ன அப்படின்னா டீபோலரைசேஷன். Na ப்ளஸ் அயன்ஸ் ஓப்பன்ஸ் அப் இருக்கும், K ப்ளஸ் அயன்ஸாக க்ளோஸ்ட் அப்பில் இருக்கும். Na ப்ளஸ் அயன்ஸ் எல்லாம் அவுட் சைட்லேருந்து இன்சைடு வரும், K ப்ளஸ் அயன்ஸ் எல்லாம் இன்சைட்லேருந்து அவுட் சைடு போகும். ஸோ அந்த ப்ராசஸ் பேர் தான் வந்து டீபோலரைசேஷன். அதே மாதிரி ரீபோலரைசேஷன்னா இந்த K ப்ளஸ் Na ப்ளஸ் அயன்ஸ் ஆர் க்ளோஸ் ஆயிரும், K ப்ளஸ் அயன்ஸ் ஆர் ஓப்பன் ஆயிரும். எதுக்கு? த்ரெஷ்ஹோல்ட் லெவல் வரைக்கும் வர ப்ராசஸ்க்கு பேர் டீபோலரைசேஷன். அதுக்கப்புறம் இது ட்ராவல் டு 2 மில்லி செகண்ட், அதுக்கப்புறம் இது 2 மில்லி செகண்ட் வரைக்கும் இது ட்ராவல் பண்ணும். அதுக்கு பேர் என்ன அப்படின்னா ஹைப்பர் போலரைசேஷன். அப்போ என்ன ஆகும் அப்படின்னா வோல்டேஜ் கேட்டட் K ப்ளஸ் அயன்ஸ் ஆர் ரிமைன்ஸ் ஓப்பனாக இருக்கும். அவன் தென் தே வில் நாட் பெனிட்ரேட் த்ரூ. ஓகே, தென் தே ஆஃப்டர் ரீச்சஸ் த பொட்டன்ஷியல் லெவல். ஒரு அதே ரீஎஸ்டாப்ளிஷ் ஆகிட்டு ஒரு 2 மில்லி செகண்ட்ஸ் தே ட்ராவல் பண்ணும். அந்த ப்ராசஸ் தான் ஆக்ஷன் பொட்டன்ஷியல். இந்த டயக்ராம் கிளியர்லி தே வில் எக்ஸ்பிளைன் ஆல். Okay, this is the depolarization. In the previous slide you will clearly understand what is the depolarization. Okay, the action potential in neuron showing the depolarization means the cell internal charge becomes less negative and then the positive charge will be more. The negative charge will be less and then positive charge will be more. In depolarization, Na plus ions comes from outside to inside the cell. K plus ions moves from inside to outside. So the inside will be Na plus ions will be more. So the positive charge will be more. The negative charges, negative ions will be less. So the process is called the depolarization. So most of the cells in higher organism they will maintain the environment. So the negative charge relatively to the cell exterior goes to cell exterior. Okay, the depolarization process will be essential for the many of functions of the cells. So the cells will be communicate each other. So the communication between the cells. Okay, so that the overall physiological of the organism they will maintain the normal function of the systems. So the depolarization process is essential for the action potential. In depolarization process, generally the K plus ions try to leave the cell, Na plus ions try to inside the cell. They will gain higher concentration inside the cell in the preceding resting state, but they cannot move fast as Na plus ions. K plus ions are try to leave the cell, the Na plus ions are try to inside the cell. The process is called the depolarization. Okay, they are below from the process after finishing the depolarization, they reaches the cells to resting potential. After they travel along the certain period, okay, they will called as refractory period. After the repolarization process over, the stimulus of the cell will be travel along to some time. That process or that period will be called as refractory period. Okay, that is repolarization, same as depolarization. The K plus ions will be higher inside the cell, the Na plus ions will be lower inside the cell. After the certain period of the depolarization, they reaches the peak overshoot. Then the cell becomes polarized again and then the cell will be returned to the resting potential. The process is called the repolarization. The principal ions of the repolarization process is K plus ions. Okay, the same as depolarization, the principal ions is Na plus ions. Okay, here the potassium ions will be the principal ions. Okay, after they reaches the resting potential, they travel along the certain period. Okay, the inside becomes more negative, affecting the repolarization back to the resting potential. The refractory period will be called as hyperpolarization. They travel along to certain milliseconds, then they reaches the resting state. That refractory period is otherwise called as hyperpolarization. And then after certain milliseconds they will again goes to their resting potential. that is resting state, minus 70 millivolt. Okay, so in repolarization nothing but the K plus ions will be high, Na plus ions will be low. The K plus ions will be goes to the higher inside this cell, Na plus ions will be goes to outside this cell. Okay, the process is called repolarization, exactly opposite to the repolarization. Okay, then the refractory period. Already we see the refractory period in the graph itself. Okay, the refractory period ensures the action potential will travel forward down the action, not backward through the portion of the action. Okay, they will ensure the underwent on the potential. Okay, they will primarily due to the inactivation of the voltage gated sodium channels, which occur the peak of the action potential and persist through most of the undershoot period. Okay, this channel, the ions or the signal after reaches the threshold voltage, then they travel along through the certain period of some milliseconds. They will called as the refractory period. Okay, the slow closure of the voltage gate potassium channels, they will contribute to the refractory period by harder to depolarize the membrane. That is, even once the voltage gate sodium channels have returned to the active state, then travel along to the threshold, then reaches the higher level, and then depolarization process, and then repolarization process. After reaches the original state, then one again they will ready for the next active state, that is returned to the active state. So the certain period of the 2 milliseconds will be called as refractory period. We see clearly in the previous graph itself. Okay, this is the rising phase or the depolarization diagram. Okay, the Na plus ions will be open, Na plus pump will be open. The Na plus ions subsequently travel from outside to inside. The same K plus ions goes from, that is potassium ions will goes from inside to outside. The negative charge will be less, most positive charge will be more in the inside. Okay, subsequently the remaining Na plus ions, after we increase the voltage now, the Na plus remaining channels also open. The same process will be continuous in the depolarization. After reaches the peak overshoot, the falling pace will be continued. In the another diagram we will see the falling pace. Okay, this is the falling pace or the repolarization process. The K plus pump will be open. Okay, the K plus ions goes from outside to inside, the Na plus ions goes from inside to outside. The remaining subsequently pump also, the same process will be continuous until the reaches the certain threshold level. Okay, this is the falling phase or repolarization process. Okay, this is the refractory period. Okay, the Na plus ions will be open up, then automatically they will not penetrate any through to the other channels, the automatically they will be inactivated. Subsequently the other channels also will be opened and then automatically inactivated. The K plus ions also will be open, then subsequently they will be inactivated certain period, then the signal will be goes to return or returned to the active state for the next process. They will ensure the action potential will travel forward down to the action or not backward through the portion of the action. They will ensure only travel forward down the action, not backward. The portion of the action just went for the action potential. again they will be returned to their active state for the next state. Okay, this is called as refractory period.